Thank you. Before we start, let me just make this announcement. Kindly select your language channel now. When you look down on your computer towards to the right, you will see a globe. Kindly click on it and choose your language. All right, so welcome everyone. It's a great honor to be here this afternoon to moderate the session for the 66th session of the CND webinar. This 66th session of the CND will be taking place from Monday on the 13th to 17th on Friday, March. And as you already know, in preparation for the CND, IDPC usually will organize webinars each year to facilitate civil society participation in the debate. So for the purpose of this webinar today, our aim is basically to share light on issues that are likely to arise during the CND session, and also some of the resolutions that will be tabled before the CND for discussion. We will also use this opportunity to highlight opportunities for civil society engagement, especially in the new hybrid format, and then showcase some experiences. We are privileged to have some colleagues among us who will be showcasing some experience of our network members in leveraging the forum of the CND in terms of their political advocacy in their respective regions and countries. Throughout the webinar, you can use the Q&A session to ask questions. This webinar will be live. We are having this webinar on Zoom, and it's also on YouTube, so that if you have some chats or some questions you want to ask, you can use those functions within the Zoom channel as well as the YouTube comments. Next slide, please. As I mentioned much earlier on, that this particular webinar is being organized by the IDPC. For the purpose of those who are joining us and do not know much about IDPC, permit me to just highlight a few things about what IDPC is all about. So as you already know, we are an organization, a global network of NGOs numbering over 200, and we come together to repair the harms of the punitive drug policies and promote responses grounded in human rights and social justice. And one of our key objectives is to ensure that there is meaningful participation of civil society in decision-making process, including at the UN level. So the UN drug policy debates are particularly, if you will, I would say that it's particularly opaque and very difficult to navigate most of the time. So this is why IDPC has taken it upon itself to try as much as possible to organize these webinars to guide people in terms of how to be able to use or navigate within the CND, and also share some tools and resources that we have as IDPC to be able to help you influence the discussions. So this webinar is one of these tools, and we will mention a few of them as we go along in terms of the discussion for this particular webinar. Next slide, please. So let me say that this webinar will not really go too much into the details of what the CND is or what it does. We have a short video, as you can see from the screen. There is a link there. You can easily click on it and then be able to watch more about what the CND is and what it does and all that. So please feel free to visit the site and then be able to listen to some of these video recordings on that. Next slide, please. So just for us to look at the structure for today, so basically, as I mentioned earlier on, we are going to go through key information and events taking place for this particular year, CND, the 66th CND. And then we are also going to go through some of the resolutions that have already been, that are going to be tabled at this year's CND. And this will be presented by my dear colleague, Adria from IDPC. Adria, we are so grateful to have you. Thank you so much. And after that, we are, like I mentioned much earlier on, we are privileged to be joined by 3 colleagues within the IDPC network who have agreed to also share their experience in terms of the engagement at the CND level. Will come in the course of the discussion to do this. We, in no particular order, we have Ruth Bergen from the Women and Harm Reduction International. We have Constanza Sanchez from ISES, and then we have Lacina Toll from Cote d'Ivoire from CONACYT. My colleague Juan will also come in the course of the discussion to also share with us a few resources that you can use in terms of the CND engagement. And finally, we'll have a bit of time to be able to do some some questions and answers session for members who are on the platform right now. Next slide, please. Now, so just briefly to take you through in terms of participation. So at the CND level, all NGOs, usually with ECOSOC status, can request up to about 10 parsers for their delegation in person or remotely. So this year, there will be in-person as well as remote participation, that is online session. And to do so, you have to send an official letter to the Secretariat of the UNODC. And then using the same letter, delegates can then go on a link that is usually provided in Indico so that you'll be able to upload the letter that was given to you officially to be able to do so. There's no public webcasts this time. I mean, previous years, we've had instances where there were public webcasts, but this time round, there isn't going to be any public webcast, but you are to register to follow the session online. So you will need to register to be able to do so. And you can follow all the proceedings, both the plenary and the committee of the whole and side events that will take place. Those that will be hybrid, you'll be able to participate in them. In case you have any doubts around these issues in terms of registration or anything around the CND, I'm sure if you visit the CND website, you should be able to find some information around that. Otherwise, you can write to IDPC and we are happy to do that for you. Next slide, please. Now, so for this year's CND, it will be chaired by Colombia, as you can see in the slide. So Colombia is going to be our chair for this year's 66th session. And Ghana will be the first vice chair of the committee. I mean, like Ghana will chair the committee of the whole. The full bureau of the session includes Colombia, Ghana, Nepal, Slovenia, and Canada. I mean, if you go on the website as well, again, on the CND website, you will see all the full details around that as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So contrary to previous years, we are going back to a pre-lock kind of schedule. And this is all going to be in full Vienna time. So if you sign on, I mean, if you look at the agenda that has been, the agenda for the meeting, all the times that have been indicated are basically in Vienna time. So please note that carefully. I've seen instances where people miss the time because of time zones differences. Now, the schedule is also available in terms of organizational arrangements documents on the CND page. So please visit there and you'll be able to find that. It will also be available on the program once it is released. So once you sign on, I mean, you've registered and everything, the program will also be released for you to be able to know what is happening at what time and at what venue. We will also try as much as possible as IDPC. You know, we have designed a CND app, and in the next few days, it will be updated to help you to be able to follow what is going to happen so that you can also select your schedule, or I mean, plan your schedule in terms of using the app. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the plenary session, usually it will start on Monday, which is going to be on the 13th. Now, this is based on the provisional agenda. In terms of what we are discussing now is based on the provisional agenda. The likelihood that it might change, we cannot really tell much, but this is based on the provisional agenda we currently have. So if you look at the agenda, they are usually designed in terms of items. And so, for instance, if you look at item 1 and 2, basically that is usually the opening and the organizational matters that are usually discussed within this period. In terms of agenda 3, we have the general debate. That is where usually you have country statements that are being made and also country positions. And during this period, I want to encourage members here, and you have the opportunity to be able to contribute your country statements to try and do so. If the opportunity avails itself, try as much as to do that. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of agenda 4, mostly this is basically a discussion around the budgetary and the administrative matters of the commission. So basically, these are things that they are more of operational segments, which will look at some administrative matters as well as issues around budgetary. Now, in terms of item 4 in particular, questions such as UNODC budgets for 2024 and the programmatic work and staff positions and all those things are usually discussed around that. And this is also an opportunity to highlight concerns about failings of the UNODC in promoting harm reduction, decriminalization, human rights, and drug control, and many other things that we have always tabled as civil society. So this is an opportunity to feed in during these discussions. Now, in terms of item 5, usually a key highlight of this year will be that the announcement by Bolivia that they will request WHO to conduct a scientific review of the coca leaf with the aim of removing it from Schedule 1. So this is something that is going to be addressed under item 5, and that is going to be tabled by Bolivia. So this is something we should be looking out for in terms of the discussions. Now, in terms of item 5, so usually in terms of the discussions under item 5, this will continue in terms of scheduling recommendations, especially. You know, every year recommendations are made for some substances to be scheduled. So definitely this will also be addressed under Schedule 5, and item 5 during the agenda, in the program. Now, on Wednesday afternoon, usually the committee of the whole will temporarily suspend in terms of the scheduling, because when these things come up, usually they go into voting. So when the scheduling activities are being discussed in terms of voting as to which substances to be scheduled, usually the committee of the whole will suspend its sittings, and then that happens, and then probably they will continue afterwards. For this year, in terms of substances, per our knowledge, it's basically a handful of scientific designer drugs that are up for scheduling. So as and when we have more details in terms of specific drugs or medicines or drugs, we will let you know which are the ones that are coming up for that. And so on these notes, next slide, please. Now, in terms of the continuation, in terms of the plenary, on Thursday, there will be a follow-up on the implementation on commitments as reflected in the ministerial declaration, the 2019 ministerial declaration. So this is also another opportunity for us in terms of following up, follow-ups in terms of that. Now,
Maria, I think you muted by mistake. I think you're still muted, Maria, so sorry. Let me try to, I just sent you a request to unmute. Maybe that helps. Ask to unmute. It's still muted. How peculiar. Let's just give Maria a little bit of time to be able to unmute.
Is it okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's all good.
So sorry, I think there was I don't know what is happening with my computer. Apologies for that. So still under item 6, one important and wide, issue, one important thing we need to also remember is the wide range of issues for the UN UNGAS, that is the UNGAS and the Ministerial Declaration 2019, especially where because of the mid-review of the process, we will be looking at in terms of the 2024, which is in a year's time. It is important that there is a reminder of the thematic sessions, especially looking at the challenges mentioned in the Ministerial Declaration. And in the lead up to the midterm review, that is next year, March, that is something that we also have to watch out. And this year too, there should be 2 sets of intersectionals to review all these challenges in preparation towards the review of the Ministerial Declaration, the 2019 Ministerial Declaration. Now, in terms of the discussions, given how broad-ranging these points are, there's a likelihood that most of these things will be continued in terms of the conversation on Thursday. So the one of the things that is very key for us at the level of IDPC is that as a network, we have always strived for system-wide coherence within the UN and the drug-related issues. So we are hoping that a number of UN entities will be working, who are basically working in the area of health, human rights, will be looking, I will be able to present something during that particular agenda item. And one important thing is also about the UN common, the common United Nations position on drugs and the role of the implementation of the task force. So these are areas that we will really be looking forward to seeing a number of UN organizations doing that. Now, in terms of UNODC leadership, the tax team has been a little bit weak. And so it's in terms of promoting drug policy that aligns with health, especially harm reduction. And over the years, little has been said much at the CND, especially when it comes to the issues of harm reduction and human rights. So how, has that materialized in terms of the conversation over the years? So we are hoping that we will be seeing more of this. And once again, I want to encourage a number of us who are here who could possibly influence our national level statements to see how we can raise these key issues, especially issues around harm reduction, issues around human rights, and then issues around the common position, how countries can actually incorporate this in terms of their strategies. Now, on the item 8, especially on the agenda, basically this usually will feature reports from most of the heads of the national drug law enforcement agencies. And these are usually presented at that level. And then so mostly if you look at it, it's basically more of the heads of national drug agencies from the various agencies that will present at that meeting, or maybe reports that will be feeding into the discussion. Now, next slide, please. Sorry. Next slide.
Can you see the one that says Friday?
No, it's still on Thursday on my screen.
Oh, how?
I see Friday one.
Okay, now it is there now.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Excellent.
All right, thank you very much. So on Friday, usually we have contributions of the CND, especially discussions, important alignments of drug policy control with the SDGs. And so commissions are usually, the commission is usually invited to think further how to follow up in terms of review the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and can also be contributed, how they can contribute at this level in terms of the CND conversations. Unfortunately, the agenda item is often ignored by a lot of member states. So as I said, if you have the opportunity to actually contribute to your national statement, please take advantage and let them reflect that in their statement, especially in this particular agenda item, that is agenda item 9. And it will be very, very welcome that if we get a lot of member states highlighting this strongly within their national statements. Now, in terms of item number 10, agenda item number 10, this is actually a new agenda item that has been introduced. And basically, it will focus on the preparations for the midterm review of the implementation of the 2019 Ministerial Declaration, which is set to take place in 2024. So we will definitely get back to that when we present on the resolution, especially when my colleague Adria takes the floor to present on the resolutions. That will be looked into more deeply. And finally, we have the last item, which will definitely focus on negotiations and provisional agenda for the 66th CND, and then the adoption of the report of the 65th session of the CND. So basically, this is just in a nutshell, how the week will look like, I mean, in a very brief manner in terms of the discussions for the 66th. So on this note, I will now pause and allow my colleague Adria to take over and take you through the resolutions.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thanks for this very clear explanation, and good evening, afternoon, morning to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to joining us. I will go over the resolutions that have been proposed at the CND in a second. But before that, I also wanted to cover a bit what are the key political themes that will be crucial to this CND. And I wanted to start by just going back to the plenary. Now, Maria has explained very well how the plenary will work this year. The plenary is where member states, UN agencies, and us as civil society go over the agenda of the commission and can take the floor under any agenda item in order to make a statement. These are normally very short statements, 5 minutes maximum, if I'm not wrong. And during the 5 days of the CND, we will be seeing probably hundreds of these statements. And if you look, like each of these statements looks very isolated, they're very formal, but if you follow them closely throughout the session, you will be able to see that they are in fact a conversation between countries and UN agencies and us, civil society, in which each of us highlight our own priorities when it comes to drug policy. So I really recommend that you follow at least the opening segment of the plenary on Monday morning, because that's where the big fishes speak, the high-level people, and also the statements of your own country. That's very good to hear what they're going to share at CND, and also the statements of the most relevant countries, like the most powerful ones. And you can go to the CND app and see who's going to speak next at the plenary at any moment. Now, how to read a statement, how to understand what they are about? Well, I just super shortly, let me give you a few things to watch for when you hear a statement. So first of all, you could watch for references to geopolitical struggle, particularly regarding the war in Ukraine. Those where the war will continue to bring tension and division in Vienna, as it happened last year. So it's good to hear which countries choose to refer to it, to condemn it or not. You can also be on the watch for references to the decisions to legalize and regulate cannabis, either supporting these decisions or attacking them. As you know, UN bodies and most member states believe that the legalization of cannabis is in breach of the conventions. So it remains a hugely controversial scene in Vienna. Some countries will attack it in statements, and others will take a step forward and maybe defend their own programs for cannabis legalization. They will talk about health, about human rights. So it's very interesting to see what are the references. A clue to see if a statement is progressive is to see if it includes references to human rights, to harm reduction, or to the participation of communities and civil society in developing and implementing drug policies. Whereas the statement is conservative when it includes reference to law enforcement, to the sequestration of drugs, or typical sentences such as achieving a society free of drug abuse, ending the scourge of drugs, etc. So just by following this kind of guidelines, you will have a very clear idea of where each country stands. Now, let me move to the resolutions. While the plenary goes on, as Maria explained, member states are meeting at the committee of the whole in order to negotiate resolutions. Resolutions are political documents that concern a certain aspect of drug policy. They all have a theme. They are not binding, but they represent the consensus of the international community on a particular drug policy area. In this session of the CND, we will have 5 resolutions tabled. I'm going to go through the five of them, and you will see that in general, they are not about progressive topics that would place drug policy reform or human rights or health at the center of the agenda. Instead, they are mostly on the conservative side. They're very technical. They focus on law enforcement. And this is because in CND, up till now, it could be broken at any time, but up till now, these resolutions are adopted by consensus. There needs to be an unanimity of member states. So countries tend to focus on topics that are not divisive, particularly in the current geopolitical context where there is really diplomatic tension and fatigue in Vienna. So let me start with the first resolution, which is about promoting alternative development. This is a resolution that gets tabled every year by Peru, Germany, and Thailand. And really, its goal is to give more importance, more prominence, and more legitimacy to approaches to the growth of crops that are based on development, rather than on eradication and law enforcement. Each year, the resolution has roughly the same text, but with some small thematic developments. So, for instance, last year, the resolution introduced a few paragraphs on the environment and drug policy. And this year in particular, we think that this resolution might be the most interesting one because it introduces for the first time references to indigenous peoples who, as you know, grow and use plants that might be prohibited under national law or international treaties for social, cultural, and religious purposes. So if the references to indigenous peoples and the right to participate in drug policymaking and to use plants were introduced and kept in the resolution, that would be one of the first times that the global drug control regime recognizes these uses and the right to continue them. But for what we know, there are many countries that will contest this. So if you are interested in traditional uses or indigenous peoples, I really encourage you to follow the debates and the new versions of these resolutions. A way of telling whether this effort has been successful will be to see if there are references in the final text to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples or to the right to use traditional uses of scheduled plants. Whereas if at the end of the day you see that the text does not make any reference to indigenous peoples, you will see that this attempt has failed. So be on the watch and let's see what happens by the end of the week in Vienna. A second resolution to mention very briefly has been tabled by, I think, Kyrgyzstan. Don't quote me. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. There you go. And it's about unmanned aircraft systems, which must be a nightmare to translate. Basically, it's drones. We all know drones. Now, the background for this is, as you know, drones are being increasingly used for drug control, for surveillance, for sometimes intended eradication, and they are hugely controversial, right? Because of issues of their potential lack of precision, the impact on the rights of communities involved with the growing of crops and impacts on surveillance, etc. And in fact, in Colombia, there has been huge political and judicial controversies around the use of drones for drug control. So there are two problems with this resolution that we're going to be watching. The first one is that the resolution, as you can see in the title, it's about expanding the use of drones in drug control. And we think that that's not a balanced approach to the issue. There are many contexts in which the use of drones is simply not appropriate, and the resolution really takes a stance of always promoting it. So we will be looking at trying to tone this down. And its second issue is that the resolution does not mention doesn't have any reference to human rights and to ensuring that the use of drones respects human rights. So we're going to be looking at these two issues and see how the text stands. The third resolution comes from Australia. It's about the safe disposal of chemicals used in the production of drugs. The interesting thing about this resolution is that it was tabled last year by Australia, but the country withdrew it, allegedly because Russia had decided to co-sponsor it. So it was withdrawn on a geopolitical rather than drug policy reason. So it will be interesting to see if this happens this year again, because still the geopolitical tension is still there. Now, in terms of content, it's a technical resolution. It has a positive focus on the environment. So it's about how to dispose synthetic drugs in a way that does not harm the environment. So that's welcome. And it's also interesting that for the first time, it focuses on how the actions of law enforcement could harm the environment. Because if they are not disposed safely, there could be harm for the environment. So we really do welcome that. There are references to the SDG, particularly to target 12.4 on the environment, that are also good. We are trying to see if this gets preserved, and we also would like to see some references to human rights, and in particular to the reports of the UN Special Rapporteur on the impacts of hazardous substances on human rights, which is it's a UN expert that has intervened in some cases, such as the use of drones to fumigate crops in Colombia. So it will be interesting to see if these human rights and environmental themes survive the CND. Super quickly to the penultimate resolution, it's the US resolution. It is about strengthening information sharing to increase international scale and implementation of scale decisions. Basically, it's an incredibly technical resolution about the use of laboratories to identify new psychoactive substances and schedule them. We really recommend that we include language on the value of using that information gathered by laboratories for health and harm reduction too. Of course, like these laboratories will compile data to identify substances to prohibit them, but of course, this information can also be very useful to understand how the impact of the substances and how we can design appropriate health and harm reduction responses. So it's important that that is reflected in the resolution. And secondly, it's also important to reflect the role that many non-governmental drug checking services have in gathering the data that is used in these laboratories and in disseminating it to affected communities and also to colleagues who can use it in the front line in health responses. The last resolution I wanted to cover is about the midterm review. And that's going to take 1 minute because it's a bit different than the other resolutions. The midterm review is, as Maria explained, the process that will be going on in 2023 and 2024 to assess how countries are performing in implementing the commitments of the 2019 Ministerial Declaration. So it's the opportunity for the drug control system to hold itself accountable and see how it is working. Now, this resolution in particular, it's going to set the rules for the process of this midterm review. And it is likely, it's the most important resolution in general in this CND. It is likely that by the time we start CND, it's already going to be agreed. That's what countries want to achieve. So it's probably that it won't reach the committee of the whole. If you see that this reaches the committee of the whole and that there are negotiations, that means that the system is in trouble and that they're really struggling to find a consensus. The key issues that are being discussed include the point to which civil society will be able to intervene in the process. Some countries really don't want civil society to be able to participate formally in the process of the midterm review. Another key issue of debate is what's going to be the outcome of the midterm review. Some countries want a new political declaration that will reaffirm the commitments of 2019, while others just want to let it go, just do the review, but not have any kind of new negotiation of political document because it's so complicated right now. And a third thing to watch is going to be the role of UN bodies in conducting this midterm review. So will the resolution only refer to UNODC, which, as we know, has more of a focus on law enforcement, or will it also request contributions by other bodies working on health and human rights? So that was it for the resolutions. Thank you for your patience. And Maria, handing the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Adria, for walking us through the resolutions. Once again, if you have some questions, kindly put them in the Q&A chat, the chat box. They will be addressed accordingly. On this note, I would now like to invite my colleague Ruth to take the floor. As mentioned much earlier on, they will be showcasing some of the experiences they have had at the CND and how that impacts their work in terms of political advocacy. Ruth, on this note, we give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Maria. And hello, everyone. Good evening and good day. Look, I want to preface my talk by noting that I feel I'm really not yet actually an expert on CND, but I am learning more year on year, as I believe is sensible civil society as a whole, as we become more and more effective in our engagement there. And I say sensible civil society to, draw a line between progressive advocates as opposed to conservative forces who keep wishing drugs to go away, which of course will never happen. I first attended CND about 8 years ago, maybe more, I haven't counted, and I was supported at that stage in my involvement with the Women in Harm Reduction International Network, or WIN, at the UNODC Civil Society Organizations group, and I'll just touch on that very quickly. This is a group that is one of not very many mechanisms where drug user networks and harm reduction and sensible drug policy organizations have direct influence with relevant UN actors. This particular grouping is good for both UNODC and for civil society, that a number of civil society representatives through this mechanism are enabled to attend the CND in person through engagement in the group, which works on a joint plans of action with the UNODC, which is the Office on Drugs and Crime. Additional civil society delegates attend through other ways and means, through forms of sponsorship, sometimes added to their own organization planning and budget to attend, and some side events and proceedings can also be joined online, as pointed out earlier by Maria. My own interest in CND was particularly sparked after attending the UN General Assembly special session on the world drug problem, which incidentally we at my network tend to refer to as the world drug policy problem. And through that experience, I came to properly understand that forward movement towards humane global drug policy is unlikely to happen overnight. But at the same time, incremental change towards our goals is happening. It's generally moving in a positive trajectory, largely due to the ongoing efforts of progressive, sensible civil society and engagement at the CND, but also with country or member state delegations and interactions from civil society. From that time, I became interested and sort of grounded about participation at the CND as a forum, perhaps the key forum for impacting the shape of changing global drug policy. There are opportunities to prepare and pose questions and interventions through, including through dialogue with the, direct dialogue with the International Narcotics Control Board, with the head of UNODC, and other more formal interventions. Ultimately, the country delegates are the ones who write and shape and get to vote and accept or reject resolutions that can produce change. There are also, mind you, very few precedents for civil society representation within the country delegations, but so far these are quite rare. Civil society actors work to interact with country delegates before and during the CND to inform and influence the decisions that they make. So since I started attending the CND, it's especially notable that over time, progressive civil society influence is growing stronger as experience has been built over the years and become more honed in exploring the opportunities. Collectively, we've now reached, in my opinion, a critical mass in terms of knowledge on how to navigate the sometimes mystifying and intimidating CND landscape. But there is still scope to build from and improve. For example, organization by civil society to influence member state delegations varies greatly between countries at the moment, ranging from well-planned regular interactions throughout the year with civil society representation, even in the delegation, as mentioned before, through to no engagement in pre-CND work. I'm a member of the Civil Society Committee for Australia, although definitely not the most industrious member, but it's really interesting, and I do dip in and out as much as I can. This committee has been particularly successful in supporting the country delegation to make well-informed, largely sensible decisions and inputs at CND in recent years. It's also enabled other opportunities. As a small example, we at RIN were able to organise a keynote from the Australian Ambassador for Women and Girls to open our side event last year, which meant that more delegates would likely attend and potentially be influenced by the content of the event. This would probably not have been possible to arrange without that pre-existing relationship between the hardworking committee and the Australian government. It would be great to see this sort of civil society organising happening in more countries, acknowledging also that not every country makes this readily possible in the same ways. And I'm thinking here of countries like Russia, China, Myanmar, and others. In fact, it seems to me that our work at CND cannot be optimized without this sort of country level connection, both before and during proceedings. In terms of advice to people who are new to the CND, I would say, try to connect with your country delegation and read the upcoming resolutions, marking your ideas for improvements. Try to answer calls for speakers at the CND when they are advertised, if the theme resonates with what you're doing and with the work of your organization. A key tip would be to not miss the CND orientation organised by IDPC, which is run the day before, and which helps newcomers understand more about how CND works and also explores the resolutions at hand, together with sort of building understanding around key points and consensus around key points to discuss with country delegations. It's also a great day for meeting colleagues that you may not have seen for a while and building new connections also. A second reinforcing tip, do download the CND app. It's really useful for scheduling which sessions you will attend and tracking which resolutions are being discussed where and when. There are rules at the CND which we need to follow if not to jeopardize future engagement, like things like, generally not naming and shaming countries, not conducting demonstrations inside the venue. These are important, but we can do other things. We can leave, in key documents at the civil society table or even directly with delegates if relevant, promoting our issues. And it is also possible to coordinate demonstrations outside of the building if that's something you want to explore. It takes some organizing though. Also, I would say after CND, look for opportunities to connect forward-moving elements from CND with processes in your own country. For example, if a resolution is passed as one was, supporting better access to sexual and reproductive health for women who use drugs in closed settings, this is something you can cite and use to affect in national level advocacy as well. Hold your country to account. And I expect someone else in this webinar will explain more about the elusive ECHO SOC. But I'll just say, lastly, I would like to say, just don't be intimidated as a newcomer. Don't be intimidated by the atmosphere and the suits there. Just get informed and get out there with confidence and knowledge of the critical role that we have to play at the CND. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. We are really grateful to hear so much rich knowledge and experience from your end. We are really grateful for your time and the opportunity to share these with us. On this note, I would like to now call on our colleague Lassina Tall from CONACYT from Cote d'Ivoire to also take the floor and share his experience with us in terms of the CND engagement. Tall, you have the floor.
Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Maria.
Notre participation à la CND à la session passée.
I would say that our participation to the last CND was online, just like many other civil society. We heard about the CND session through the Vienna committee, and later we had it through IDPC. Unfortunately, many are not able to partake in the CND due to financial challenges. So we had the opportunity to partake online after the training made by IDPC, CONACYT follow the CND online. And then with one of the organization who is a member of the UN ECOSOC, we could also call on the IDPC to partake in the session. What I wanted to put across that in order to partake, we needed to fill a form and send an official letter. And I think the sample is on the website. Well, we can say that the CND activities follow what is being put on the agenda. And I think Maria shared the agenda of this year's CND. But what is actually important to note is that during the last CND session, we realized that there were different declarations made by countries, and many countries denounced the war in Ukraine, and we realized that the time given for country delegation to take the floor was very limited. Certain decisions were also taken, and I observed that certain decisions were actually taken or made through voting, a voting process. There was also the declaration by the NGO. The civil society that intervened actually were more doing an advocacy or use the advocacy approach. And well, when we were filling the form, we fill a form that showed that we were observers. When it comes to the interest to participate in CND, we will say that for us as an NGO is very important because uh, the root of what we do is around advocacy, and to have the weapon for that advocacy, it's good to partake in CND sessions. Well, in our case, we realize that many countries in their declaration share, of course, their experience and the good practices, especially through the parallel session or the side events. We were also able to partake in a side event or side activity. Well, we were aware of the resolution that we were taking because we follow keenly, and this enables you to do a citizen audit when it comes to drug policies in our various countries. And as I mentioned earlier, it helps us to shape our advocacy work. Our participation also give us the opportunity to have access to information regarding CND online, especially the process. For instance, today we are able to go when we want on the CND website to have access to the various resolution and all other information. This opportunity enables us to actually identify the various representatives or the various delegates of our country, and it tells us where to tune our advocacy work or who to go to for our advocacy project. Of course, there were some challenges. It was an online participation, and this is not always easy because of internet connectivity. We are not able to follow all the side events, but with the recordings and the the minutes, we are able to catch up. So, in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to share with you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity given us to share this experience with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tol, for that. We are really grateful for the insight. So we would like to take our last presenter, Constanza, who will also share some experience with us, and then we will move to the next agenda item. All right, so Constanza.
Muchas gracias, María, y buenas tardes, buenos días a todas. Bueno, yo...
Thank you very much, Maria. Hello to everyone. So I'm going to share a few reflections on some things we've learned. And also, if we have time, a few tips that would have been helpful for me if I'd known them the first time that I went to the CND. So these are some more general reflections about what political advocacy can help with at the CND, as well as how it can help us in our in-person work as people who work for drug policy reform in our own countries. So I went to the CND for the first time in 2011. It was quite a while ago. And it was very different to the situation that we see today. And when I went, I still wasn't working at ICERS. I was doing my doctorate degree on the international system of drug policy enforcement. So I went to the CND to see what was going on there, and I sent an email to the secretariat asking how would I be able to attend a CND session. So they let me come in and observe with observer status. I don't know whether that's something that they do very often, but that's how it worked for me. So I wasn't representing any civil society organization, but rather I was just there as an observer. And the experience was really interesting. First of all, I met many of the people who were there at the time, who had really made a big impact within the civil society world. For example, colleagues from Transnational Institute. I remember meeting quite a lot of people who I was already aware of their work. I think there were some people maybe from IDPC as well. I think Anne was there maybe. But so having gone to that session, what I realized was that what went on there was really transcendental. That it was something that really helps us to understand what's going on with the drug policy in our country, and that we can use to really push for reform in our context, in our countries. And that was something at the time in 2011 that there really needed to be a lot more push there, and there wasn't very much unification or very much collaboration between the different organizations. So it was a very, very interesting experience to be able to see how things worked there, how things worked within the framework of the United Nations, what the different countries, or rather their governments, say at the CND, and then what they go on to do on the ground in the countries. There's often a discrepancy there. I think over the years as well, we've seen confirmed how the changes that occur at the UN level, they're very, very slow. It's something where things change little by little every year. And that being said, there's still a very large impact on the global level that can be catalyzed by by a number of quite small changes that we can make in our own work as advocates and rights defenders. So having learned what I did there, we started, once I started working at ICERS, we started to really focus on having more participation and attending the CND more, and learning from that and using what we learned to apply to our work and improve our advocacy efforts. And it's always been kind of almost like a lighthouse that helps to orient us and helps to guide us in terms of where we're going and what sort of strategies we want to adopt, better be able to advocate for drug policy reform. So from my point of view, one of the things about the CND that's important is that it really forces you to learn how to negotiate, how to really go head to head and meet with different politicians and try to convince them to be there, to be present, to present your position and the reforms that we want. It's almost like a form of training in a way, of being able to see how we as a civil society organization, how we can think about what as stakeholders, what everyone is looking for, what everyone's position is, and what the best way is to influence and to convince, with the view to pushing for more progressive reforms and drug policies. So You're able to see as well, as I mentioned, that different member states might say one thing at the meeting, and then we see that it's not implemented later on. Another thing that can be very useful are the resolutions, the different debates that happen. They can be used to help complement our own work in various contexts. It's also, in my opinion at least, it's very interesting to be able to meet and interact with other colleagues from civil society organizations, because it helps you learn from other people who have more experience than you. It also enables you to network and to increase your number of contacts. And at the government level, in terms of organizations themselves, and NGOs, that is, not government agencies. And so we're able to create alliances, we're able to cooperate, and perhaps form networks and essentially create a community amongst ourselves, a support community, a network that we can use to work together with similar organizations around the world. And because depending on the forum in which we find ourselves, civil society isn't always very visible. Not all government level meetings or forums want us to be there, so we don't always have a voice. And it's important to have that opportunity to show that we really can be there, and if we have the chance to participate in these debates, it's extremely important that we're able to, even though it's sometimes quite difficult. So just to close, this was just some ideas that I wanted to share with all of you. But some advice that I would give, that I've learned over the years, I think that it's important to know exactly what our goals are when we go to the CND, but we also need to be able to keep our expectations in check. What does that mean? It's important to know what is the framework in which we're going to work, be able to really get the most out of the opportunity, to know what they're actually talking about, what's being debated, what are the different skills that we have here, what are the different sets of knowledge that we have here, who am I speaking to, what is this person, what is their skill set, where are they coming from, what is their knowledge base. As activists, like say that we want to legalize cannabis all over the world. That's great. It's something that a lot of organizations are working for. But honestly, if we go there and we just say this is what we want, we're not going to get very far. It's more useful to keep your expectations in check a little bit, and really be aware of the context. So, for example, at ICS, we work a lot with the traditional use of psychoactive plants. This is a topic that isn't always easy to bring up at the CND. And though we do have this resolution tabled by Thailand and Peru, but for example, at ICERS, we can't just show up and start talking about ayahuasca, which is one of the most important psychoactive plants. But what we can do is we can kind of use the framework for cannabis, for example, that we've been seeing already, and what's happening in Spain, for example, in that vein. So I think it's important, and it's necessary to collaborate and work together with other organizations in other parts of the world that do similar work. And and to really try and advocate politically year after year, so that there's always something that people can learn, that people can take home with them, and something that they really hear, and where they really hear you and go home having learned something. Also, in terms of work and collaboration between colleagues within the organization, sometimes the CND agenda is so complicated and there's so many things going on at once. So if you have one person in the plenary session, for example, and someone else following a specific resolution and how it's evolving, it can be good to divide the work a little bit so that different colleagues focus on something different, and that way you work together as a team. And then in terms of the meetings that can be organized as well, I think again, keeping expectations realistic in terms of what you can expect and anticipate from a government, but it's important to try and make contact, so that you can kind of get a foot in the door, so to speak, to then be able to continue conversing with those people, maybe going to visit them, going to make a visit to that country, because it's not just the country in question, but there's many different countries. So we're not just working in our own country. It's also possible to go visit and see what's happening in other countries and learn from that as well. So I think it's important to know that it's important to make those contacts. It's very important to listen, to see a little bit about how things are working, how things function in this institution, and then we're able to follow up more effectively in the future. And just to conclude, I'd like to echo the idea of that Ruth explained, that we need to be patient, and think change doesn't happen at once. Little changes can have a huge impact further along down the line. And as Ruth said as well, don't be intimidated. It does seem like something very official. There's a lot of politicians, people in suits, but at the end of the day, we do have a place at the table there. Our participation is important, and we really can make an impact. And thank you very much. And if someone has a question, we're happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Constanza, for these rich ideas and guidance on how to actually utilize the CND platform for advocacy work, especially in terms of civil society. We are actually running out of time. So on this note, I want to invite my colleague Juan, who will take us through in terms of useful resources that you could use at the CND. And yeah, so on this note, let me call on Juan to take the floor to do that for us.
Thank you so much, Maria. Very quickly, and again, yeah, thank you to each one of the panelists that spoke about their incredibly useful experiences. Just very quickly about key resources. You have the official CND documentation page. So if you go to, if you Google UNODC CND, on the website of UNODC, there's a section dedicated to CND, and you can find all the official documentation from CND there. It's also referenced on our website, so that's also why I'm referencing our website there. If you go to idpc.net and then go to the events page, the CND website will be there, and we highlight all key information as well as connecting to the official CND website. And finally, the Vienna NGO Committee Guide, which is also referenced on our website and available on the website of the Vienna NGO Committee. So if there's three resources that you need to remember, those on the screen are it. And I would also encourage you to download the CND app on the Apple or Android store. You can also have it visit it online at cndapp.org, but you won't get the full functionalities that the app has. I just very quickly wanted to go a little bit back to the side events, because I think we skipped that. So just very quickly, many of our colleagues have mentioned it. There's more than 150 side events taking place, with a very interesting breadth of subjects. So do have a look at the program and see what's interesting to you. Also, it's worth checking events that are not necessarily focused on reform, but where we can take our concerns with regard to positions that certain countries, for example, might take that are not in agreement with our understanding of drug policy that is human rights based. So this is an opportunity also to create that space for dialogue and not allow reactionary ideas to go uncontested. And finally, there's the not finally, but there's also the informal NGO dialogues with representatives from WHO, OHCHR, UNAIDS, and UNDP. I mean, all of those 4 authorities. This is something that is reflected also on our website. So go to our website. This is one of those mechanisms of engagement between civil society and representatives of the UN that is worth engaging with. Again, all on the IDPC website already. There's an NGO briefing by the Vienna NGO committee on the very first day of the CND. By the way, this is all hybrid events because the CND is taking place on a hybrid format. So you can join online if you so wish, if you're following the meeting remotely. There's an event celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Vienna NGO committee, which I'm putting here because it's 40 years of that really useful mechanism of engagement between civil society and the Vienna-based institutions. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was the AGM of the Vienna NGO committee, because there's going to be board elections. You can find more information about this in the site of the website of the Vienna NGO committee. We are a bit over time, so I am not sure if we will have time for questions. Oh, I'm sorry for bombarding you with more and more information, but like there's also, if you want to receive the IDPC digest, which is a daily update of upcoming interesting side events and items at the plenary, and which resolution is being discussed and what's the state of resolutions and discussions, reach out to me, jfernandez@idpc.net, and I can send you those daily digests. Check the CND blog also, because we blog in real time with a team that integrates colleagues from all over the world to keep you informed about what these debates are about. There's no official record of these discussions, so the CND blog plays that role. As I said, we won't have questions because we're a bit over time, but do not hesitate to reach out, contact@idpc.net if you have any questions. And thank you so much for joining us. Maria, I will give the floor to you to wrap this event up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juan, and thank you to our 3 panelists and all the team, Adria, for making this possible. We are really grateful to all the participants for joining us on this webinar. Because of time, we have to end here. However, if you have some burning questions and you want to clarify, please do send an email to IDPC, contact@idpc.net, and we'll gladly respond to those questions. On this note, I want to bring to an end our webinar. Thank you very much. Wishing you a very great day, a great week. Thank you so much.